Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of My Thoughts of the Week. And this time, I'm going to answer a question again that keeps coming up in rather some recent conversations with people regarding car restorations. Classic car, modern classic restorations for any car that requires it. What is a car restoration and why do people embark such a journey? Because despite the fact that people seem to think this, I've not restored any of my cars. None of my cars are restoration projects or have been restoration projects. For one reason or the other, I really don't think any of my cars should be labelled as such. Is it a word that's overused? Of course it is. Car restorations, it sounds glamorous, doesn't it? It's been romanticised by Practical Classics and Wheeler Dealers and Car SOS and all the mainstream media, TV programmes and magazines. Come on, anybody can do a restoration. And that is very true. Most people, I think, are very capable of doing some form of restoration. But the key is to buy the car that suits your needs and motivation. And that's something I'm going to talk about a few times in this rather bloggy episode. But yeah, there are several things to cover in this episode. So I'm going to start with the first question, which I've just naturally said. Is the word classic car restoration overused? Yes, in a nutshell, I think it's very much overused. I think it's a very glamorous word, as I've said, and people like to say that word because it makes it sound like the car that you've restored, like, oh, yeah, I've had this car X amount of years and I've restored it to bring it back to the road. And it sounds rather glamorous, doesn't it? It sounds really good, and it sounds good when you're doing a sales advert. But is it a restoration? Most cars, I think, are not restorations. The one reason why I say that is because, number one, let's start with a few things. Project Ruby, Fiesta Mark III, been off the road for 11 years. Solid on the bodywork, just some niggles here and there. It just needed a good clean-up. The interior needed rebuilding. All the engine bay needed coming apart, fully servicing. Any bits that are broken, missing, replaced and repaired. That's a recommission. Now, some people would argue that could be slightly more of a rebuild. I argue, actually, I have done a sort of light-hearted rebuild, but really, honestly, a rebuild is more intense. A rebuild is where you're literally restoring bits, and I say I've used the word restoring little bits of the car, but it's not an overall car restoration. It's a rebuild. You're rebuilding the suspension. You're rebuilding the cooling system. You're rebuilding parts of the engine. You're rebuilding the exhaust system, interior. And that's what the focus is. So the Fiesta is borderline rebuilding in some departments, but I haven't really touched the suspension. I haven't touched it at all, actually. I've only really touched a few departments. It has been a recommission job. And considering that the car was actually MOT done on the road last year for a very brief period, that means that it is a recommission because it still had an MOT until it ran out. So it was always a recommission. Project Beatrix was definitely a recommission to the road. That car, again, had been off the road for 2 years. And it needed a lot of departments rebuilding. The engine needed a rebuild with the head gasket and a lot of the cooling system. It needed a thorough looking at. The interior was stripped and cleaned and just popped back together. It wasn't a massive undertaking. Although saying that it was, because it invaded my flat half the time with parts and bits and pieces. Underside, I haven't really touched the suspension at all, apart from a few bits and pieces and dust covers. It's never really needed it. We had a few other bits and pieces done to it, but it needed a really good clean. And for me, that again is borderline what Ruby is. It's a recommission, a very heavy recommission, but not a rebuild. The Focus Mark 1 was a rebuild, not a restoration, because the car was a working vehicle. She had bits and pieces rebuilt during periods of, I say, because it was my only car at the time for a short time, probably in a month's time, I would rebuild the whole suspension in a month. And that's what I did. Took it all apart, everything. Everything at the rear end got replaced in a month. Front suspension in another month. Engine bay, continuously improving it and replacing things that needed replacing. The interior, stripped down. Seats, rebuilding on another month. All these things happened somewhat alongside Beatrix, because when that car took over, I did a few jobs, but most of the car was done by the time I bought Project Beatrix. And that was the intention, that the focus then became not the daily, but the actual modern classic in a garage, very nicely preserved. And then Beatrix would take over as the daily driver, which has been this way to this day. The Focus is not a restoration project. None of them are. Why? Because none of them needed rebuilding in terms of the bodywork. I think for me, the most underlying factor of any rebuild, I've had paintwork done on the Focus. Yes, I've had paintwork, I've had a bit of metal, but not a lot. It hasn't really needed that. And for me, I think the word restoration has to describe a car that has gone several years untouched, completely neglected, just sitting there, rotting, deteriorating, not being used, and quite frankly, it could have gone either way. A car that is restored could have gone to the scrapyard. Well, then again, Project Beatrix should have gone to the scrapyard. 100% that car would not exist now if it hadn't been for me. But that doesn't mean it's a restoration. It takes somebody to see beyond the moss and the algae and the flat tyres and, you know, a little bit of bubbling here and there. It takes someone to see past that and look at what you've bought. And I do think the underlying factor between a rebuild and a restoration is a restoration is a complete bodywork stripped down rebuild. Literally a rebuild. The whole thing has to come out. Shell, you know, everything's basically been stripped off the shell at one point or the other. There are very few cars that I actually class in that bracket. And that for me is what a restoration is. And I think that people that go and say, oh yeah, my car was restored. And then I'll ask them exactly in what way. How did you restore the car? And what they're describing is a rebuild or even a recommission, not a restoration. And it does sound glamorous, but I really don't believe half of what people say. So the next time you see a classic car advert that says restoration, have a look at the details and see whether the picture that's built up suggests that it's a restoration. Are there tons of receipts with the car? Is there pictures of the shell being stripped and then welded and painted? Has it had everything off, suspension included, interior stripped out? Has it had that? Because if it hasn't, it's not a restoration. And then the other question is, should I restore a car? Well, the question is, what car do you want to restore? And my best advice is, if you want to restore or even do what I've done, you see, we're not talking about just restoration here. We're talking about recommissioning, rebuilding a project car. A project car does not automatically, you know, just because someone says, oh, I've got a project car, does not mean that it's automatically needing restoring. All my cars are project cars, technically. They're all rolling rebuilds and recommissioning projects. The word rolling restoration for me is a bit of a joke, really, because a car that needs restoring cannot be rolling. Rolling restoration, I don't understand that term, really. My best advice is to buy the car that you really want to restore, because a car that you're thinking that you could restore because you've seen an opportunity to potentially restore a car and then sell it for way more than what it costs to restore and plus what it costs to buy and make some money on it. Well, that's what we call the wheeler dealer's myth, and it's a joke. You are literally kidding yourself if you think you can do that. There are not many cars in the world today that you can do that with. In fact, I'd say it's practically zero. Unfortunately, Wheeler Dealers, that TV programme that never counted Ed China's labour, when I used to watch it, Ed China was there anyway. I didn't really watch it after him. You can't count the cost of what they've paid because you haven't even added up his labour. So therefore, whatever the cost is, it's going to be way more. Ed China's labour is 40 to 50 quid an hour. Probably for his sort of calibre, 50 to 60 pounds an hour is quite normal. I mean, if you added his labour on all those jobs, they'd have never made a penny, Wheeler Dealers. It was a stupid exercise, and it showed people, gave people the wrong impression about restoring cars. You should always restore a car Never for profit. It should always be for a car that you want to do it with, a car that you are personally either attached to, either because it's a relative's car and it's been handed to you, or you've bought the car of your childhood or nostalgia memories and you want to rebuild it and you've got it in the right spec and engine combination and everything about it, you know, smacks of, this is definitely what I want to do. You have to be sure of yourself, because if you're not sure of yourself, if you're doing it because if you're doing it on a whim because, oh, that's a nice car, I really wanted one of them. Yeah, but the problem is it's not necessarily that strong, because in a few years' time, after doing, you know, a long-term restoration takes years. And after doing this for such an amount of time, you're going to get bored. Your motivation is going to wane. Willpower is rubbish. Ask anybody who's gone to the gym to get fit, who've said, oh yeah, I'm going to the gym, I've got willpower. They give up. Willpower is not good enough. Willpower is absolutely rubbish, whether it's getting exercise, having a diet, going on a diet, or restoring a car. Willpower doesn't get you through that. It's going to be because you own the car that you want to restore. And that's it. That will get you through it. Well, it's like cars that I review. So I haven't reviewed many cars on this channel, but the cars that I review, you will know that I really want to own. Me personally, or drive. So basically any car that I review on this channel would be a car that I would equally, if I had the money and space, welcome into my home. But equally, obviously, money and space is what limits me, which is a good thing, because otherwise it would be a problem, a real big problem. And that's motivation. It's will. I can't do reviews based on, I'm not really keen on this car, but you know what? I've been offered it. I'll do it. I'll make a video. That's willpower. That's not because I want to do it. That's willpower. It's rubbish. It's going to make a rubbish video. You guys will see that straight away. You'll know you'll know from my videos which videos have motivated me more and which I'm not so keen on. I've done that in the past and I try to avoid doing these things, but I really do think so. Willpower is absolute rubbish. Please buy the car that you want to restore. Do I need to be a mechanic or expert to do restoration? Oh, goodness me. No. Whoever's told you that, whoever's put that in your head is an idiot. Because I've known people who've never ever embarked on any sort of restoration in their lives and got somewhere. Now, you don't have to do the whole restoration yourself. You can have somebody do your welding and do the paintwork. Most people need that help, you know, unless you're a welder or a painter and you work for a body shop, that, you know, you're not going to get that done, are you? So everything else, apart from that, is down to you. You got to do the prep work. You got to do everything correct. And that for me is, that it's setting your stance very early on what you can do and what you can't do. And you can do an awful lot. There's Facebook, there's the forums, there's Haynes manuals. You can even, I'm not being funny, with a lot of cars now, you can find somebody, hopefully, who's willing to come out and have a look at the car, who's restored one of them cars before, so he's got insight into what to look for and to set the standard of, okay, this is the expectation, this is what you're going to have to expect with this car. So it makes you more aware about the car you're buying. Even before you've bought the car, have somebody go who's actually rebuilt and restored one of these cars, so they know what they're looking at. Gives you a bit more motivation. They can give you the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and they can just make you very aware. Experience is absolutely crucial with these cars, and it's the sort of thing that I do on the Ford Focus Mark 1 side of things. On the Rover 45, I give my experience, and the Fiesta, you know, I give my experience on what I've done and then what other people have done, instead of saying, oh, you shouldn't have done that right, oh, you shouldn't have done that right. Just be positive. And I try to give a lot of positivity, and that's what empowers people. You know, knowledge is power, and that's what all this channel is about. And restorations are no different to that. You need motivation, you need knowledge, and you need some experience just behind your backside, and you will learn a lot of skills along the way. And by the time the restoration is finished, I tell you what, you'll be better than a mechanic or an expert. You will be one yourself, literally. The next question is, how can I give advice to people about restorations when I have not apparently conducted a restoration of my own? I've done partial restorations. A rebuild for me has to be a partial restoration. It has to be classed as somewhere near there, but in bits. I've got all the skills to do a restoration job, but I wouldn't want to. Or I'll come to that a little bit later on why I would personally never embark on a restoration. That's another a little fireball there. But another question that I get asked, or actually people put this view across, which is really bad, and that is, do you need a garage to complete a restoration? No, you don't. I've done most of the work on my cars without a garage. It's only in the last year that I've had a garage storage. But I don't work on the Focus in the garage, although I have done some little jobs here and there. But there's no space in a garage. Well, I'm not being funny. You can't really do much on it. There's no space. And I'm a thin guy. It's just like, you need like a double garage. And where are the double garages in this country? There's no double garages in the UK, unless you actually had one purposely built on your land. In that case, you're very, very lucky. But if you don't have a garage, don't worry about it, because most of this can be done on the driveway. Just get a good car cover, get a carport. There's loads of different options out there now. I'm sorry, it's the same people that will go, I don't think people who own I don't think people who don't have a garage should have a classic car. I think that's disgraceful. I really do. That is such an old-fashioned viewpoint, isn't it? You know, we've got so many more options now, and we have a lot more ingredients and products that can keep water from embedding on the surface of a car. Waxes and spray waxes, all this kind of stuff, Dynax, everything. It will help preserve the car in situ while you're working on it. It really is, I must say, you know, having a garage is a luxury, and it's great to have it in the garage if you can, but if you can't, don't worry about it, because most of the time you're going to be offloading the welding and the bodywork and the paintwork that need to be done inside anyway to a body shop, because, you know, body shops are very busy and they are at a premium, and it's one part of a restoration you can't do outside. So don't worry about that. A garage isn't going to change that. I mean, I heard of some people say, oh, I'm going to respray my car in the garage. Really? Goodness me, it must be really dust-free in your garage to do that. I've never heard of such rubbish in all my life. So, yeah, it doesn't work out at the end of the day. You can do most things on the driveway. Have it outside your house. If you've got a driveway, use it. Perfect. Just do bits and pieces of you. This driveway has been immensely fantastic for me. I'm very lucky to live where I live with such a nice driveway, and I do have enough space to work on any one of my cars off the road. I'm not rushed. I don't feel unsafe, and it's a pleasurable experience. Obviously, not everybody's in that position, and I think that if you have only got on-road parking, that's a bit of a problem. That is, because on-road parking for me it isn't a safe thing, and it's not really one of those things that I wouldn't really want to be embarking on any restoration or any rebuild in that position. So maybe a garage might be a better option. But it depends on what your circumstances are, so I don't judge like that. Budget. How much money have I got to spend? That's the question you should be asking yourself. People factor in car parts more than anything else, right? And resources. But what they don't factor in is electricity, and then time, and there's a few other bits and pieces that you don't realise. In petrol, if you're going to and from, if it's stored at a garage and it's nowhere near your house, you've got to factor in fuel. So a lot of these costs do add up in car restorations that people just don't consider. So just be aware about that as well. But I would say whatever figure you have in your head for panels and parts and resources, triple it, double it, triple it. Because you don't know how much it's going to cost when you start digging into it. It's like when you go to your body shop and they'll say, you'll say how much to have an entire sill replaced on my Focus, and they'll be like, don't know. Until we start cutting into it, we can't give a figure, and that's quite usual. Some places will give a sort of 500 to 600 quid if you're lucky, and that's quite cheap for a sill. But it probably will be higher. Probably could be up to £1,000, because you just don't know what they're going to find behind there. And it's the same with restorations. You don't know what you're going to find. Most people go into it thinking, it's going to be simple. Every single car that I've bought, I thought, even Ruby, I thought, this is going to be a quick recommission. Was I wrong or not? Every single time I keep getting, I keep sort of setting my limits quite low, and I'm still surprised. So that's even me with a bit of experience. So you don't realise how much you actually will eventually get into the car when you really do start getting stuck in. And that's when the cost can start mounting. When you say, oh, that's broken here. The list is building up straight away. So you really have to be factor in this a lot. My advice with restorations is when you're potentially looking at a project car and it's in pieces, it's on someone's driveway, it's been there many years, or in a garage or whatever, and the car's in bits, like it's got bits missing off the dashboard, bits missing off the engine bay, and there's all sorts of cardboard boxes full of parts on the shelf in the garage, in the car, and the car comes with all these bits. I think that's very risky, because unless you know the car inside out, how are you going to know what you're missing? You know, you're going to have somebody there to go, you're missing this, you're missing this, you're missing this. Unless you have that person there, you could end up buying a car with a severe amount of parts you're missing, and you don't know whether the parts you're missing are simply unobtainable, or if they are obtainable, they're very expensive. Again, that's where the cost can escalate, and I really advise buying such cars. Okay, somebody has to buy them, but at the same time, I think some cars are just best left for spares as donor cars, because I just don't think it's worth regarding a restoration unless I prefer to indulge in a car that is, it's there. It's not very good, but it's all there. And a lot of it needs replacing, but it's there. You can see what is there. Some bits might be missing over time. They are old cars. Bits go missing. You know, people fiddle with things and they lose things. I've never bought a car with things missing on it. They all have a life and a history. So I think you should kind of factor that in. But as long as you can see the workings and roughly what is there, interior, engine bay, underside, in the boot, whatever, pieces of trim, you can see what's obviously missing. If it's got two, if it's supposed to have two of them and there's only one of them, etc. Like, I don't know, trim panels on the roof or whatever. So bear that in mind. And really, I think what you have to think about with a restoration is whether you are in a position in terms of your work and your daily life. You know, we've got family, work, kids, you know, everything that comes with it. We've all got to earn our living. We've all got to go to work. And you have to think about how much time you're going to actually have with the car that you're trying to restore. And it could be, some people, I know somebody who used to work overseas. So every month he would be away, then he'd come back for a month. And he had a Jaguar XJ Series 2 that he was restoring very nicely indeed. And he kind of put the car off for an entire year until he retired, because there was no point in doing a whole month of work and then being away on work on the car, I should say, and then being away at his proper job for another month, and then come back and do another month. It's just on and off is not good. You have to do bite-sized chunks, personally, to keep the ball rolling. So today, you know, I've changed four spark plugs. What am I thinking? 4 spark plugs. So I've changed the spark plugs today. I'm going to go in and have my tea. I'm exhausted. Or today, I'm going to do a bit of cleaning. I don't feel like doing anything much. I just feel like doing a bit of cleaning, bit of sanding down, bit of white, you know, a bit of thinners just to prepare some areas. Or maybe we'll take a few things off, put it in boxes and then label it. Whatever it is, even if it's stupidly 15, 20, no more than 20 minutes of work a day, you're kicking the ball down the road, which is what I do with all my cars. Because I always think, do you know what, today I've done absolutely no work on any of my cars. And I always, even if it's just visual inspections, I always do that with all my cars. So the focus this week, yeah, I've been in and I've done a couple of little cleaning jobs. Even if it's cleaning jobs, just do it. Just do it. It just makes me think, yeah, I'm just, you know, I'm maintaining these cars and I'm keeping on top of it, which is good. You've got to keep on top of it. I'd say the most difficult thing, I don't think it's restoring a car. I think restoring a car is easier than what I do, and that's maintaining 3 cars in excellent condition. That's hard for anybody because you're basically going to be repeating a lot of things you've done before. So fancy, you know, the first time you do a restoration, let's say on your Mini, you know, you're taking that dry cone suspension apart, and then you put it back together with all new parts. Fantastic. What if some of those parts you've put on the car, which happens a lot now, some of those reproduction parts are not so good, and you're getting some, I don't know, the cone's wearing out, or you're getting some ball joint knocking, and you're having to take bits off that you've already taken off before, and you're doing the job again. And when you've done it a few times, it gets a bit laborious. And I honestly think that maintaining a car is the difficult bit, not restoring. The restoration bit is always, we want to get to the end of the tunnel where we are finished. No such thing. But we all do it. We always say, well, after this suspension, I'll be finished. Well, we don't mean finished, because we know that cars are never finished. It's just you've got to the point where you can really only go down. That's the problem. And this is what I'm going to come to in the next thing. What do you want to achieve? What do you want to achieve? How far do you want to go? That's the question that I always ask myself, even with doing what I'm doing with the 3 cars I've got. How far do I want to take the Focus? How far do I want to take the 45 and the Fiesta? That's a big question, that you really need to ask yourself whether you're rebuilding a car, recommissioning a car, or restoring a car, especially restoring a car and rebuilding it. Because you need to think about, what am I going to use this car? How regularly am I going to use this car once I'm finished? Once the restoration is finished. Are you just going to use it as a weekender and show car, and it goes in a nice dry garage and never sees a damp sponge in its life, and a bit of rain? Or are you going to get it out? Are you going to actually use it the way you use other cars, but a bit more than just a weekend, and use it and enjoy it while you can? You need to think about this. Is it going to be a concourse? Is it really going to be concourse? Or is it going to be near concourse, but with some rough edges that you'd feel, yeah, I can use this car? It's really important that you make that clear to yourself before you start. Where are we going with this? Some people don't have an answer at first, because what they see in front of them is just a pile of bits and pieces, a rotten shell, bits missing from the interior. It doesn't run. It looks sorry for itself. It looks appalling. I think to ask somebody that kind of question at that stage is actually quite a poor one. And as you're going through, and as I've discovered myself, as you're going through the process, you start to think, do you know what, this car is actually looking much better than I thought. And then where'd you go from that? Where'd you take that forward? Do you actually think, do you know what, I can take this further? I can make this car look really, really nice. And I think with Beatrix, I think that was the surprise. I think Beatrix, I thought, was going to look more rougher and much more ragged than actually what she turned out to be, which is a good car with bits that need working on. And I don't want that car to be any better than that, because if the car was any better than that, I wouldn't want to use the car. So that's where Beatrix is, a good working car with some rough edges that, well, very few rough edges, I'll put it that way. I think I'm being overly critical, but I can be. The Focus is, I'm aiming for near concourse, but not concourse. None of my cars I want to be concourse. I think concourse is a curse, because if you ever make your car concourse, you'll never want to drive it. You end up like a trailer queen. You'll be one of these people that actually tow their car to a show. I think that's awfully sad. When people can't actually drive their cars to a show, because they're so scared of it deteriorating because of the dirt and the dust, even on a perfectly dry day. Why? It's a car, not an ornament. If you're going to take your car on a trailer to a show, you might as well trailer it to the nearest museum, because that's what it is, sadly. And I don't want any of my cars to be anywhere near that prospect that I would ever want to fear about driving it. I do think with the Focus, I've got this fear of driving in water and rain, because it's just been such a long time since that car has seen a puddle of water, and I've seen that the actual positive results of not driving that car in such weather has had on the condition of the car in slowing any form of deterioration down. Oh, there has been some minor deterioration around the corners, but honestly, that deterioration could have happened in about a week if it was on the road in the wet. In a year. So that's where that car stands. Ruby, I think Ruby is going to be never concourse. Unless I have the paintwork professionally done in a few places like the boot. It's never going to be concourse. I don't want that car to be concourse because I want that to be a car that I can equally use when I'm not going to a show. I like to just, it's a hot summer's day, let's take the Fiesta out, let's go shopping. And that, for me, is what classic cars should be about. Not hiding them away in a skulky corner because of fears of theft or vandalism or having an accident, because you've gone too far with the car and you're so worried that if you had an accident in that car, you would lose that car and you'd be kicking yourself. So I never go concourse, but that's just me. You may want to go concourse. I think it's a full man's paradise to think that personally. So that really leaves this episode here, and my overall viewpoint of restorations is I will never ever conduct a restoration, because for me there's no enjoyment factor for me in restorations. There is nothing worse than taking on a car. I wouldn't even dream of taking a Mark 1 Focus to restore, and yet I know what to look out for that car, and I know how far I would have to go to restore Mark 1 Focus. It'd be an entire strip down. Tyre. I literally probably send the shell to my body shop and say, deal with any holes that you need to deal with, sills, arches, anything, any rot, deal with it. And respray the shell and bring it back to me. That'll be a couple of grand. That'll be £3,000. That'll be a £3,000 job, maybe 4. And that's what it would take to restore Mark 1, which is why I don't recommend restoring any car, because the cost will always bear on your head when family, friends, life start asking questions that, where's the money? Why have you got no money to go out and have a meal with your friends? Why are you always short of money and you can't even take the kids out, or I don't know, buy your kids some presents, or why are you always short? Because that for me is no fun to anybody, whether it's, I can't afford to go to, weddings or whatever it is. Whatever it is in life, those are some really poor examples, but you get the picture. When life starts crying to you, that's for me where the lack of money, because you've spent all your money on the car, is going to actually make you quite depressed. No matter how good that car looks, you're not going to be very happy. And I think making some financial decisions as well is something that you must do. I financially cannot afford to do that. My finances are very much, we have to do jobs little and often. Constant jobs, spread out. Not one big fat job that costs about £5,000 like that. I ain't got £5,000. I ain't got that sort of money. I might have that sort of money in a few months' time, but that's a few months. I can't wait for a few months' time for that kind of money. So I have to do things like that. And that's the way I've worked the Focus Mark 1, the Fiesta and the Rover 45. Spread out. And that's why restorations for me is no fun. Because when you do restorations, you can't enjoy other aspects of life. And there is life beyond cars. I wouldn't be the last one to say, we all love what we love with cars and for the love of cars. But equally, we have a life outside of cars, outside of metal boxes, full of lovely memories and nostalgia and lovely smells and touch and nice touchy-feely sensory experiences, as I say. But you have to look beyond the cars. And that's the most important thing. And that's why I don't recommend restorations to anybody. If it's too far gone, leave it. Too far gone. I'm going to leave this episode here, so I hope this has been quite helpful. And I shall see you in another Rambly episode at some point. Take care, guys.